So I'm just going to run through a couple of my songs real quick to demonstrate various ways I use the Spitfire Audio Lab synths. I'll link the songs below. This first one's going to be Wilderness Supremacy, which is off my album Dangers. And it's sort of this Nordic noir sort of it's got ethnic percussion and some flutes and strings. So it's got this very sort of mysterious, dreamy feel to it. And the labs go a long way in doing that. So the first thing I use is, you can see these really short notes. Well, what I actually do with it is I use a ton of Valhalla room on the lab synth. So I'm using pad 5 here, and I of course have the mix all the way up, the decay really high, almost dimed, all these settings here. And so this is going to run for a while. So on its own, this is how that sounds. So I'll stop it there, and it's just going to keep running. So I'll actually mute it. So you can see that runs throughout the length of the song here. Get rid of that. Another thing I do is use it to kind of create like a bit of a rhythm. Not necessarily bass, but it kind of adds as sort of, or acts as sort of a bass synth. So just to kind of show you something, I'll start with this hand drum rhythm. And then shakers eventually come in. And so the very first thing I use here in this rhythm is following along with that. So you see I have another pad 5 and a little bit of reverb. The attack's up pretty high because I want it to be pretty present and forward. And then on the other one, I had the release way up. This time I turned it way down because I don't want it to turn into a pad. I just want it to follow along with what the drums are doing. So I'll have that come in now. So kind of just like a bass synth, it gives it a little bit of the low end. And then eventually I even have more drums come in. So I'm just slowly filling the song out. The next thing that I'll show is now I'm using pad 4 here. And you can see I have a little more reverb. I think the attack is just a touch lower. And I think the release might be a tiny bit longer. So I play with those settings as well to really kind of change how not only they individually sound, but just how they play with each other. So this is how that one comes in. So it's the same as this. I just copied the track, but it's a different sound playing it. So it really kind of just, again, changes the sound, beefs it up a little bit. So I'll play just this one and then let this come in, and you'll see how they come together. More than anything, I think you can hear how different the release is on it. This last one that comes in is a little bit longer, and it kind of plays with this first pad up here as well. So there's kind of a lot going on, and you could see how they're staggered here. Let me undo those. You can see how it's staggered. So the song slowly builds. Then I have flute here, I have strings, I have some other string stuff here. So there's quite a bit that sort of builds, and you see all this down here as well. So that's one way I use it, is just to kind of give it some low end, give it some rhythm. But another thing I like to do is on my song Old Blood, title track from the album Old Blood, is I essentially copy this piano track down here. So I actually use a Labs choir, but then I have a Labs synth right there. So the piano pattern is a very simple progression. I'll play that for you by itself. So simple 3-chord progression. Here's the synth on its own. I'll show you what I've got there. I use pad 4 again, and I just use a little bit of EQ on there because I have a pretty sharp attack, but it's higher pitched. I moved everything up a little bit, so you can see here that it's the same 3-chord progression. And you can hear how long the release is on that, because just like the other song, even though I'm kind of using this as a reverb, I'm kind of using it just to beef up the piano sound. Where's the release? You can see it's way up, 12 seconds. So, and then of course some reverb, onboard reverb there. And so together, they really sort of fill out space. Another small thing I'll add in, this is actually the Labs choir. I just have some longs here, but I shortened the attack on it, so it's almost gone. So those on their own sound like this. So see a shorter release, and I probably took, even though I took the attack down, because they're longs, they don't like hit real hard. So those 3 all together. And then finally, you can see I have another one that I called bass. I'm using Valhalla Room, almost a full mix. I have the decay all the way, and I have most of these settings way up as well. You can see I have reverb pretty high up. The attack's actually down, but that's because I've got all this reverb that I needed to come up without it have that like staccato hard attack. And then of course another long release. And so that added in so there's just some that there. And there's choir longs as well that'll eventually come in. Go ahead and stop that. So a lot of these tracks here are just to mimic what else is going on in the track, to slowly fill out the sound. And they're not quite as staggered as the first one, but they slowly come in, and sometimes I'll also mess with things like the volume envelopes to fade some of that stuff in and out. You can see I do some of it here with strings. So those are 2 common ways that I like to use things, and in particular these Labs range of synths, to kind of fill out tracks.